The Nova Helix Command Station floated on the knife edge of reality, tethered to the swirling gravity well of the Maelstrom Rift. Light here didn't travel in straight lines, it bent, fractured, and scattered like shards of stained glass across the black. From a distance, the station looked impossibly fragile, a silver spindle threading between storms of bent space. Up close, it was a fortress layered armor plating, glowing shield rays, docking bays that could swallow capital ships whole. Inside, the multiversal council hall hummed with a restless energy. Tiered balconies spiraled upward, each section tailored to its occupants' gravity pools for the aquatic species. Heat chambers for the methane breathers, suspended crystal lattices for the photonic minds who preferred not to touch the floor at all. The air was a blend of alien scents, ozone, mineral dust, faint spices. Above the center days floated the quantum predictive or 8's physical projection, at least. A lattice of white gold lines spun in perfect symmetry, each thread pulsing with probability data. For 300 years, it had been infallible. Until today, Archon Varus stood at the heart of the chamber, a silhouette of controlled precision. His silver eyes scanned the hovering data stream as he spoke, his voice a clean, cold blade. The system has failed. The hum of the translation lattice carried the words to every mind in the chamber. Conversations faltered, a crystalline delegate tilted, facets catching the pale blue light. After 3 centuries of perfect accuracy, Varus continued, the quantum predictive ray has registered an error. 0.73%. The number landed like a silent explosion. Delegates shifted in their seats, murmuring in languages of clicks, subharmonics, ultraviolet flashes. Several craned their gaze upward toward the ray's projection, as though it might blink and correct itself. No one knew the cause. That was impossible. In the upper tiers, Xyrus of the HFY collective, its body a tower of shifting light, leaned toward a neighboring delegate, voice rippling with amusement. It will be traced to some meaningless anomaly, a comet's shadow, a planetary storm, nothing important. The chamber doors parted with a hiss, interrupting the whisper. A shaft of warped maelstrom light spilled into the room, cutting a crooked path across the polished obsidian floor. Elias Kane stepped through it. No gilded cloak, no ceremonial armor, just a dark, tailored jacket over a black shirt, simple boots, and an hurried stride of a man who had already decided how this day would end. His eyes swept the chamber, never lingering, never avoiding. He was not welcome here, and the council didn't bother hiding it. Archon Varus's voice was calm, but there was a metallic edge beneath. Captain Kane of Earth, you have 47 minutes to convince this council why your species should remain in interstellar commerce. The statement drew a wave of sound, dry laughter from some, low hisses from others. Xyrus flared in bright, mocking color. 47 minutes. Plenty of time for a primitive to explain why they still matter. Elias stopped in the pool of light at the center. The gravity here was calibrated to a median standard, but it felt heavier in the gaze of 53 civilizations. His gaze made one slow circuit of the chamber, noting the disdain, the curiosity, the mild predatory hunger in a few faces. His wristband pulsed once, sharply. He lowered his gaze just enough to catch the message flickering in encrypted code on his inner display. 0.85% against you. Votes already been decided. The sender tag read Consul Dreven, one of the supposed moderates, a man who had once told Elias over drinks that he admired humanity's unruly charm. The message ended with no signature, no suggestion, just the bare fact of defeat. Elias's lips curved not into a smile, but something smaller, colder. A micro-expression that wouldn't register to most species here. He looked up again, letting his eyes settle on Varus, then drift across the tiers until they found Xyrus's glowing silhouette. 47 minutes, he thought. Let's see how long it takes to make them sweat. And without waiting for any more ceremony, he took his first step forward. Elias didn't waste time clearing his throat or easing them into the point. The council wasn't a place for preambles. Every delegate here lived in a world where information was weaponized, and hesitation was weakness. For the last 14 months, Elias began, voice carrying evenly through the translation lattice. Your predictive models, the same ones you trust with your wars, your markets, your diplomacy, have been wrong. A ripple passed through the tiers, some subtle, some not. One aquatic delegate flicked its fins sharply, A signal of disbelief. A gelatinous life form rippled through shades of doubt. The photonic minds dimmed slightly, as though drawing computational power away from their outer glow to run the numbers themselves. Off by exactly, Elias continued, letting the pause stretch just long enough to make them lean in. 0.73%. The number struck like a pressure change in the room. Several delegates exchanged quick bursts of data, private side-channel conversations igniting across the chamber. From the shadows of a side balcony, a low, resonant voice cut in Counselor Haroon of the Karis Dominion, his scaled skin catching flecks of light, an insignificant deviation, statistical noise. Elias turned his head toward him, gaze level. 2 of your military campaigns failed in the last 14 months, both by margins small enough to be explained by statistical noise. That landed. Haroon's crest stiffened involuntarily. A tell that his species couldn't hide. Elias let the silence breathe before delivering the cut. That tiny imperfection was enough to collapse entire fleets. Strategic positions lost. Objectives abandoned. All because your vaunted system thought the wrong thing would happen. From his place on the dais, Archon Varys's silver eyes narrowed. You're suggesting, he said, precise as ever, that a decimal point variance destroyed 2 campaigns? Elias gave him a thin smile. No. I'm suggesting someone planted that variance exactly where it would matter most. The hum in the chamber shifted. It wasn't just skepticism now. It was uncomfortable. Delegates leaned back, posture closing off. Some flickered low-level alert colors across their skin or exoskeletons, a subtle broadcast of unease. Zyrus, of course, wasn't buying it. It leaned forward in its shimmering lattice form, voice shimming like fractured glass. Random chance. The universe is full of accidents. You humans are simply more prone to them. Elias didn't look at Zyrus. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. And the source. He let the pause hang until it was almost unbearable. Inside your own systems. The reaction was immediate. A crystal delegate's glow faltered. An avian species in the lower tier hissed through its beak. One of the machine intelligence and voice froze completely. Its light panels going dark for half a second, an eternity in processing terms. Elias's wristband pulsed again. He didn't glance down this time. He knew the rhythm. Yara Holt's voice slid into his ear, warm but edged with mischief. Visual packages primed. Say the word and I'll light up their pretty little web. He didn't respond to her yet. Instead, he raised his voice just enough to reach the furthest balconies. The real question isn't whether it's happened. The real question is how many more times has it already happened without you noticing. That was when another voice cut in, not mocking, not hostile, but sharp, council-driven. Captain Kane, are you implying this council has been infiltrated? Elias turned toward him, eyes narrowing slightly. This was the same man who'd sent the 85% against you message minutes ago. Was he playing along, or testing him? I'm not implying anything, Consul, Elias said. I'm stating it as fact. Gasps. Color shifts. Metallic chimes from the crystalline delegates. The translation lattice lagged a fraction of a second, trying to keep up. From the far left tier, a representative from the Morith combined bellowed. If this is true, present proof. If it is not, Earth's presence here is a waste of oxygen and bandwidth. Elias allowed himself a slow breath. He knew they wanted him to show his hand too early. That was how they'd box him and force him to reveal evidence before the timing was right. But Dreven's message echoed in his head. Use fear. Proof, Elias said, is exactly what I came here to deliver. But I prefer an audience that's paying full attention, so let me make sure you are. And with that, he stepped forward, directly into the beam of light at the chamber's center, deliberately drawing every gaze. The beam of light at the chamber's center brightened, catching tiny motes of dust in its glow. Elias stood in the middle, hands loose at his sides, every movement deliberate. If you want proof, he said evenly, let's start with something you think you understand. He tapped his wristband twice. The air above the center of the chamber rippled, bending as though space itself were a sheet being pulled taut. A lattice of light and folded white gold threads weaving into an intricate three-dimensional network. At first, it looked almost beautiful, hundreds of shimmering nodes connected by clean, pulsing lines, flowing with the steady rhythm of information. The predictive array, Elias said, in real time. Delegates leaned forward instinctively. To most of them, this was sacred more than technology. It was the cornerstone of civilization. The very reason empires could stretch across light years without collapsing under chaos. For a few seconds, the lattice pulsed in perfect symmetry. Then Elias gestured, and image zoomed in on a section of the network. Subtle ripples began to move along the threads, not smooth waves, but jagged loops and spirals, like turbulence in a calm sea. These, Elias said, highlighting the distortions with a flick of his hand, are nonlinear perturbations, chaotic input streams too small for your filters to flag, too complex for your algorithms to classify. But over time, he traced a ripple's path through the lattice until it ended in a larger shift. They pushed probabilities just far enough to tip the outcome. From the mid-tier balcony, an insectoid delegate clacked its mandibles sharply. Such patterns could be environmental, an avoidable noise. Before Elias could reply, Cyrus's crystalline body flared in agreement. Even the greatest systems cannot be flawless. This is a natural error. A low chime sounded from the council's right flank. One of the machine intelligence delegates, its body a floating sphere of segmented plates, projected a small hologram of its own. We have run parallel analysis on Captain Kane's sample. Results indicate 82% probability the anomalies are within acceptable random variance. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Varys's silver eyes flicked toward Elias. It seems your proof is less compelling than you hoped. For a moment, Elias said nothing. His gaze dropped just briefly to the floor. In his ear, Yara's voice came in tense now. Heads up, their security net just tried to quarantine my data feed. I'm rerouting, but if they lock me out, don't let them. Elias murmured under his breath. Working on it, you've got maybe 30 seconds before I lose visual. Elias looked back up, his voice steady. You're right. Random noise is inevitable. That's why I didn't bring you any noise. With a single swipe on his wristband, the lattice projection shifted. The anomalies, once scattered, now pulsed in synchronized intervals, small at first, then growing into a clear rhythm. The timing was precise, almost mechanical. Noise, Elias said quietly, doesn't march in formation. A flicker of unease passed through several delegates. Even the machine intelligence sphere paused, its plates rotating a fraction as it recalculated. And if you think this is coincidence, Elias continued, ask yourselves why the exact same pattern appears here. He zoomed the lattice out to a different sector of the network, where identical distortions pulsed in perfect sync. And here, Yara's voice returned in his ear, triumphant now. Reroute complete. Feeds locked. Give him the big one. Elias didn't smile. But there was a shift in his stance, a subtle signal to anyone who knew him that the real show was about to start. This isn't noise, it's an intrusion. And it's been running for nearly 2 years. Right under your nose. The chamber didn't explode into noise immediately. Instead, there was a moment of heavy stillness, as if the entire council was trying to collectively process the implication. Then voices rose, shouts, flashes of color, harmonic pulses of alarm. From somewhere in the back, a delegate shouted, if this is true, we are compromised at the highest level. Elias's voice cut clean through the chaos. You are compromised. And if you want to know just how deep the knife goes, keep listening. The uproar swelled like a storm. 53 civilizations, each with their own way of signaling fear, outrage, or defiance, erupted into a chaotic orchestra. Flashes of bioluminescence, metallic clanging, rippling colors, bursts of ultrasonic sound. The translation lattice strained to keep pace, stitching the noise into a coherent feed of overlapping demands. Archon Varys raised one hand, the silver of his eyes catching the chamber's glow. The noise ebbed but didn't vanish. Captain Kane, he said, his voice cold enough to cut steel, you've made a serious accusation. If it is true, the implications are unacceptable. If it is false, it is treason against this council. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Then you'd better hear the rest. He tapped a new command into his wristband. The holographic lattice above them dissolved, replaced by something larger, more sprawling. Trade routes. Thousands of them. Glowing lines that crisscrossed the galaxy like veins in a living organism. Points of light marked hubs, planets, stations, wormhole gates. Color-coded overlays revealed which routes belonged to which factions. This, Elias said, is your commerce. The lifeblood of your empire. The view shifted again. Red fractures began to spread through the network like cracks in glass. And this, his voice hardened, is what happens when you remove Earth. The simulation rolled forward. Fleets failed to arrive on time. Cargo convoys stranded in dead sectors. Perishable goods spoiled. Refugee ships went without fuel. Economies are destabilized. Trade agreements dissolved in finger-pointing and retaliation. Elias let the projections speak for themselves, but after 10 silent seconds, he drove the blade home. Within 90 days, the outer colonies will face food shortages. By day 120, 3 border regions will see armed conflict. And by the end of your standard year, the alliance will fracture into at least 6 competing blocks. One delegate, feathers bristling, stood abruptly. You dare suggest a single primitive world could cripple the largest interstellar network in history? Elias didn't look at him. I don't suggest it. I show it. This, he gestured to the collapsing simulation, is the math your own systems are too proud to admit. From the upper tiers, Cyrus's crystalline body flared a defiant red. Even if true, there are redundancies. Replacements. You are not essential. Elias's voice stayed calm, almost conversational. Redundancies take time to activate. Replacements take years to train. And while you're scrambling to patch the holes, the same force that put those 0.73% anomalies into your system will still be there, working against you. A heavy pause. And if you think that force will stop at trade networks, he let the words hang, watching as the implications rippled through the chamber. Varys's gaze was unreadable. And who, he asked, commands this force? Elias tilted his head slightly. You're talking to him. That drew another wave of noisome disbelief, some outright alarm. It was then that Consul Drevin finally spoke again, his voice cutting through the chaos. What do you want, Captain Kane? Elias didn't hesitate. Full membership for Earth in the Quantum Alliance, with rights, protections, and a vote equal to any founding member. And if we refuse? Varys asked. Elias tapped his wristband. The hologram zoomed in on a cluster of gold-highlighted roots, Earth's hidden footprint in the Alliance network. Then the roots began fading from gold to black. Is the last time you'll see these lines lit up. Yara's voice came in his ear, quiet but charged. They're cornered. All you have to do now is wait. Elias didn't answer her. He was too busy watching the chamber transform, not physically, but in posture, in the tiny shifts of expression and body language. Where there had been open disdain minutes ago, now there was calculation and unease. They were starting to believe him. And worse for them, they were starting to believe he might already be in control. The chamber was silent now, in a natural kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the tightening of space when everyone realizes the balance of power has shifted. And they're still deciding whether to resist or adapt. Arc when Varys stood like a statue at the center, days, silver eyes locked on Elias. If we agree to your terms, Captain Kane, the disruptions will end. Elias's expression didn't change. We'll stop introducing new ones. The existing perturbations will fade over time. You'll have stability again. Eventually. The way he said it made eventually sound like both a promise and a warning. A low murmur passed through the council. Delegates exchanged data bursts, flashes of color, ultrasonic pings. Somewhere in the top tier, a machine intelligence envoy was already running predictive models of both outcomes. Even from here, Elias could see the numbers playing across its light panels, and from the flicker in its core, the projections weren't good for them. Cyrus, still burning in defiant red, spoke up. If we give them this power, they will abuse it. Elias turned his head just enough to meet the crystalline being's glow. If you don't, the system you rely on is already under siege. You don't have to like us. You just have to decide if you'd rather have the anomaly working for you or against you. No one answered immediately. Varys's gaze swept the chamber. His voice was deliberate, resonant, carrying the weight of a leader making history. We vote, now. A soft chime rang through the hall. The tiers dimmed as each delegate cast their decision through private channels. The sound was faint but distinct, like the tick of a clock winding down. Elias didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break eye contact with Varys. He already knew which way the wind was blowing. The chime returned. A holographic tally appeared over the days. Admit Earth to the Quantum Alliance had passed 63%. The number wasn't overwhelming, but it didn't have to be. Varys inclined his head a fraction. Earth is admitted, effective immediately. Rights and privileges equal to those of founding members. The council's seal flared in the air above the chamber. A formality, a public declaration. But to Elias it was the click of a lock coming and done. He allowed himself the smallest nod. Wise decision. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the chamber doors. The sound of his boots against the floor was the only thing that followed him. No applause, no jeers. Just the echo of a man who had gotten exactly what he came for. Epilogue at the shuttle bay of Nova Helix was quiet, its vast curve lit by the fractured glow of the Maelstrom Rift. Elias stepped aboard his ship, sealing the hatch behind him. The moment the lock engaged, Yara Holt's voice came over the comm, sharp with satisfaction. "So, we're in," Elias confirmed, moving to the pilot's chair. "Guess that means we start pulling the hooks out of their system." "Yeah." Elias's hands moved over the controls, plotting a course away from the rift. "Pull them, no." His tone was matter-of-fact, almost casual. "Now we start phase 2. A new hologram bloomed over the console, larger, more intricate than the one he'd shown the council. Gold threads wove through sectors the Lions hadn't touched yet, branching into roots. Relay points, shadow markets. Yara was silent for a moment. Then, "You didn't tell me you were building this." "I didn't tell anyone," Elias said. "Not yet." The ship's engines came alive, a low vibration running through the deck. "You know they'll be watching us now," Yara warned. "They'll watch where I want them to," Elias replied. Outside the viewport, the light of the Maelstrom Rift shimmered like broken glass. "And while they're looking there, we'll be somewhere else entirely." The shuttle detached, gliding past the station's defensive ring and into the warped starlight beyond. Behind him, the most powerful political body in the galaxy believed they had avoided disaster. Ahead, the real game was already in motion, because humans didn't just win. They made sure the other side thought it had been their idea all along. The rift's fractured light faded into the black as Elias's ship vanished into the unknown. Somewhere out there, phase 2 had already begun, and the question wasn't if the Alliance would notice, but when. If you were sitting in that council chamber today, knowing what you know now, would you have voted for Earth or against it? Drop your answer below and tell me, who do you really think is in control?